I want to tell you a little bit about Clint. He's a San Francisco author, and while he was researching, he found that in peer-reviewed articles on medical marijuana, he discovered surprising information and evidence that marijuana has anti-tumor properties and protects the brain from injury and aging. Clint wrote Marijuana, Gateway to Health, How Cannabis Protects Us from Cancer and Alzheimer's Disease, documenting the hard science that is often ignored. Clint has degrees in journalism and library science, studied diet and health at the Kushi Institute in Boston. And besides being a journalist, an activist, a microbiotic chef, he's also a dachshund enthusiast. 2 of them, and many more, right? Relocating to San Francisco, Clint co-authored the San Francisco Police Department's 1987 Health and Fitness Plan and worked to create healthier diets and lifestyles for AIDS, cancer, and heart disease patients. Clint's writing has appeared in many books and journals. His awards include the 2012 Peter McWilliams Award for Activism and Outstanding Achievement in Advancing the Cause of Medical Marijuana by the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, and in 2013, the Galileo Award by the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies for his achievements and persistent efforts to research, study, educate, and promote the use of medical marijuana. Please welcome Clint Werner.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here because, of course, I have a background in library science. I'm in the city I love and have lived in for a few decades now. And I was here at the opening of the library with my partner, Donald, my spouse. And we were talking about that being 1997, I believe, 96. Long time ago, but I'm really honored to be here, and I want to thank Ruth Amernick so much for putting this together. She not only has done everything to make this happen, this talk, but she also has secured some of my books for the library. So I don't want to cut myself out of any sales, but you know, if you're tight and you can't buy it, you can still read it and learn the data by checking it out from the library. And I also need to thank Janet, Tom, for coming and giving me posters and promotional material and helping put this together. And David, my sound and AV guy back here who's filming this. So thank you all very, very much for having me here. And it's really an honor to be here. So I thought I'd start out today talking about where we stand sort of in the world today with marijuana, because it seems like everywhere we turn, we're hearing about marijuana. It's really quite amazing to be here speaking about this at this point in time. When we put this talk together, we had no idea we'd be at this point where so many marijuana events have collided and come together to make it a really primary focal point in the news and sort of the media realm. So first I'd like to talk about Colorado and Washington State. 2 states, it's great. Here we have 2 states that have finally said no to prohibition and have legalized marijuana. And while it might not be the optimum way of legalizing marijuana, it really has started the ball rolling and begun conversations that were very much impossible to have just a few years ago about what it means to be a responsible marijuana user and how do we provide marijuana for the people who want it. And when do we stop locking up people who enjoy marijuana? And these are topics we need to have come into the public arena for a while. And so this is great. And it's really stirring things up. It's normalizing the talk about marijuana. Marijuana is no longer completely a forbidden, demonized topic and substance. And so we're hearing more and more about marijuana as a viable commodity and substance for use. And it's also pretty interesting now that we have a really smoking Super Bowl coming up, because we have, you know, the two Super Bowl contenders are teams from legal marijuana states. And, you know, it's probably one of the small consolations I took from that horrible loss of the 49ers. At least I could say, hey, you know, the Niners didn't pull it off, but we're going to have a Super Stoner Bowl. And so this is really going to be interesting to watch, because this whole idea of the two legal states being in the Super Bowl, it's normalizing things in the media. The discussion is lightening up. It's not this dark, reefer madness drenched mythology being trotted out so much anymore. People are having rational conversations about marijuana as a viable substance for use. And that's really great, because it changes the milieu, it changes the zeitgeist, and we're at about 55% of Americans supporting legalization, and this helps push it along, helps alleviate the fears that people have, and really changes the way people will look at marijuana. It sort of undoes a lot of the brainwashing we've been subjected to for well over 60 years. But still, you have the pushback now, because you've got the irrational reefer madness proponents, the people who now are really frothing and writhing and having a terrible time of it, because we're not talking about marijuana as though it was a radioactive waste or something. We're talking about it as a viable substance that adults can enjoy and use. And so we have the opponents, the Nancy Graces, the David Brooks, the Pat Buchanans, really going over the top. Nancy Grace is amazing. I finally sat down and watched. I can't, the woman, she's so tacky, and she's just so offensive. And I just, you know, if I'm flipping, I don't watch a lot of TV, but if I'm flipping through looking at something, I can't stop at her for more than like a minute. And so I had to force myself to go and watch the clips of her reefer madness spiel. And she's talking about just killing families and destroying lives and wrecking havoc and shootings and strangulations that occur because of marijuana. And I'm just like, this is so bizarre. This really is like so far back to the 30s, reefer madness, completely over the top and hysterical, and no foundation for it. And I saw someone posted, they called her Harriet Anslinger, which is a reference to Harry Anslinger, who was the sort of dick, federal dick, who got marijuana banned and promoted the Marijuana Tax Act that banned marijuana back then. So these people are really going crazy, and the problem is that they don't have a lot of ground to stand on. They're losing their arguments. They're losing an audience and support. And so what they're doing is turning to a few tried and true horror stories that marijuana causes psychosis. That's sort of their fallback, their last great hope to steer people away from legalization, is to convince the public that using marijuana causes schizophrenia or psychosis. It drives people mad. And there's just no substance for that. There's no support whatsoever for this. Because when you look at the rates of schizophrenia and psychosis in the country, they've remained stable from before the marijuana era in the 60s, when it went from very much a niche subculture sort of thing to more mainstream popular use, especially by college students, and then through the 70s, where the popularity really, really exploded, and on through the 80s, and you just never see a corresponding increase in psychosis or madness or schizophrenia. And in fact, there was an interesting study, 2012, that found that psychotic patients who use marijuana regularly actually live longer with a better state of health than psychotics who do not use marijuana. Another interesting aspect of that study was that the marijuana-using psychotic patients in a follow-up review of the data, none of them had died of cancer, whereas 4 of the controls had died of cancer, which I'll talk about a little later in terms of anti-tumor properties. But so the whole psychosis is their last best hope because it's slippery and it's hard to disprove, and it's, you know, they can talk to it and it's scary and parents don't want crazy kids, and, you know, it's just not valid. There's no support. What there is support for is that a lot of people who have proclivities for developing psychosis will self-medicate with cannabis. Once they try cannabis or they hear word of mouth that it works and they try it, they find it helps. It reduces their anxiety, it reduces the problems they're having, and it really helps them. So that's why you have such a large number of psychotic cannabis users, is because it works for them and they're self-medicating. It's not a causative agent in psychosis. One of the other objections that they raise to legalization is that marijuana is much stronger and that it really is dangerous and damaging because it's not your parents' marijuana. And the way they play off of this is that good marijuana is much more readily available these days than it was in the 70s and 80s. So what they're trying, I heard Patrick Kennedy today on the radio, and he just, you know, this guy, he needs to stop embarrassing himself because he doesn't know what he's talking about. He said that these kids are using GMO marijuana that's so much more powerful than what their parents used. It's not the same thing. It's GMO. So, you know, he's heard that hippies are afraid, and young people and activists and people who are conscious and thinking about the world, you know, have a real concern about GMO. So he's glommed onto this word and put it onto marijuana as a real scare word, marijuana, GMO. But I posted on his Facebook page that, come on, really, where in Humboldt, Colorado, Mendocino, Big Sur, anywhere that people are farming cannabis, has one of those farmers established a multi-million-dollar genetic engineering lab? You know, the hippies are back there somewhere in Humboldt, right, in a trailer, and they've got gene splicers, and they've got, you know, different kinds of lights that reveal the fibrils of DNA, and they've got specially designed pipettes and all of these this really advanced equipment, electron microscopes, and they're genetically engineering marijuana. No, that's not happening at all. What's happening is good old tried and true selective breeding. The same thing that turned thistles into artichokes and wolves into dachshunds. And this is just picking out the genes you desire and creating breeding for those traits. And that's what's happened with marijuana. In the 60s and 70s, marijuana was not as strong in general because it was grown on plantations and it was not really cultivated as an art. But when you cultivate cannabis with an artistic hand and a deep appreciation of it, and you optimize all the elements that go into it, you get really good cannabis. And really good cannabis was available in the 70s and the 80s. It just was only available if you knew someone. You know, you had to know someone. If you were like with High Times, or you lived in California and you knew someone, you were on Grateful Dead tour, you got good cannabis. It was really strong, believe me. It was not 2 or 3%. And it has been bred to optimize it, and it's gone up, you know, a few points maybe in potency, but nothing profound from what the really good cannabis was, and it's just more available. Strong cannabis is healthy cannabis because you have to ingest less smoke to get the effects you want, whether it's for euphoria, relaxation, or for medical use. So this whole idea of the new GMO marijuana is a ruse. And in fact, we had hashish for hundreds, thousands of years, which is the concentrated resin of the marijuana plant, which is 2 to 3, 4 times stronger than the source marijuana that it was gathered from. And so that's, you know, even stronger than the marijuana today. So that's not been a problem other than the risk of getting arrested for it. And it is nice. Good hash. So Obama talked to David Remnick, publisher, editor of The New Yorker, and he's gotten a lot of attention about that because, and it's great because I was pretty shocked after his unkind history to medical marijuana dispensaries. He came out and he said that, in his opinion, marijuana is not more harmful than alcohol. And he also dialed it back a lot, but thankfully the soundbite that's getting the attention is that marijuana is not more harmful than alcohol. And yeah, it's a great start. And he also said that, you know, it's something I don't want my kids doing. He sort of played up that idea that you're not really a great person if you use marijuana. And I object. I use marijuana and I am a good person. Thanks to Mickey Martin for that quote. And so, you know, he said this, this wonderful quote that's gotten out there, but I don't think he took it far enough because marijuana is not only not as harmful, not more harmful than alcohol, it's far less harmful than alcohol, and it's far more beneficial than alcohol. And so when we look at what the science says about this, cannabis protects us from the brain damage caused by binge drinking. Alcohol causes neurotoxicity and destroys white matter in the brain. It's neurotoxic, alcohol. Small amounts, not a big problem, but for binge drinkers, alcoholics, they're killing off their brain cells. There was a study done out of a group in San Diego, and they were hoping to show that this polydrug, you know, marijuana and alcohol coupling did more damage than alcohol alone. They wanted to have, you know, some fuel to work against marijuana legalization. But when they cooked their data and looked at it, they found that the teenagers who were binge drinkers who used marijuana had a significant reduction in the impairment to their white matter. It shielded the brain against the poisoning of alcohol. This was a pretty significant amount of protection for the brain from alcohol by marijuana. Also, there was research that showed that alcoholics who go through withdrawal, the hardcore alcoholic who goes into withdrawal, it is such a profound toxin that your body adapts to that taking it out really upsets so many of your bodily systems. And one of those deficits is in the brain. What happens is this withdrawal process triggers what's called excitotoxicity in the brain cells. They are agitated. They're agitated. Their adaptation to alcohol, you know, the alcohol's removed and this adaptation isn't working with brain chemistry, and they agitate themselves to death, essentially. And this causes a whole cycle and chain reaction of neurodegenerative malaise and damage because the toxins that are released from these brain cell deaths, they go and they change the way other receptors in the brain and cells process neurotransmitters and react to them, and they open up too much and they receive too much calcium, and it's this whole process of death, and then you get more cells dying. And what cannabis does is it goes in and it quiets down the brain cells. It soothes them down. Same thing it does to us when we're like been out of shape, you know? Have a little cannabis. Take a breath and relax. It soothes them down. It attenuates this excitotoxicity. And if there's been excitotoxicity that's already released these toxins that are causing this chain reaction downstream of this, then it actually neutralizes these toxins and shields other brain cells so that you stop this whole chain reaction of death and brain impairment. And it's very effective for that. Also, there was a report from a national health agency that said that there is no safe threshold with regard to alcohol use for cancer risk. In other words, all exposure to alcohol carries with it some risk of increased carcinogenesis. you're more likely, the more you drink, the more likely you are to develop a number of cancers. And so we see that alcohol is very much a pro-cancer substance. Now, you can have it in moderation, and generally, you're not going to suffer from that, hopefully. But what we also see is that cannabis, marijuana, has profound anti-cancer activity, anti-tumor. It inhibits the vascularization of tumors and keeps them from growing, and changes the environment that actually leads to the development of cancer. So it prevents the development of cancer, and it attacks cancer cells, inhibits their ability to survive, and actually kills them off. So when we really look at, oh, and one more aspect of this, alcohol. A recent study came out about 3 weeks ago that showed that with regard to dating violence, alcohol definitely significantly increases the likelihood of violence in dating situations where there is no correspondence with marijuana. Marijuana does not increase the likelihood of dating violence. So, you know, when you look at this, you can see that there's really no comparison in terms of alcohol and marijuana. Marijuana is not only safer, it's more beneficial. And that's one of the messages we need to carry with us out into the public. People scoff sometimes at marijuana users. I know drinkers somehow I sort of sneer and look down on potheads, but there's an old line from a song in the 30s about vipers who were pot smokers in that subculture, and it said, the pot smoker said to the boozer, "I'll be standing on the corner high when they bring your body by." So that's very, very true. And so I'd just like to talk a little bit about who it is that's resisting legalization, and then move on to more details about the medical effects. And it seems to me we have basically 3 types of people who are resisting legalization. We have the profiteers, the law enforcement officers who get huge infusions of cash to fight cannabis. We have the drug treatment profiteers who have a very profitable funnel right into their treatment programs from the courts. Police, courts, treatment. If you get caught in places smoking a joint, maybe you smoke it once a year, want to go see a movie once a month, you're not anywhere near dependent, you get arrested, you go to court, you get option, jail time, or treatment. You're going to take treatment. This gives them stats to claim that marijuana throws so many people into treatment, and it's a big profit agency, you know, an industry, a drug profit industry. And those are some of the most vicious and intense people opposed to legalization. They are going crazy, and they're really, I mean, they're beginning to talk about the threat of, now that it's legal, people will be injecting marijuana. And of course, like I said, the GMO claim, and they're really losing it and discrediting themselves when what they need to do is to stop, look at the science, and come and join us about having a conversation about how to keep the most vulnerable populations from using marijuana, which I think are young teens. And I think we could probably get together on that and have a productive discussion instead of all this excitotoxicity that they're going through. So the profiteers, and then we have the authoritarians, the people who don't want you to do what they don't approve of. You know, this is David Brooks, people like that. You know, there are things I don't like people doing. I don't like people eating junk food and garbage and corporate crap that they put in their mouths like a stream of poison. But you know what? I don't think you should go to jail or be arrested or sent to treatment because you don't choose to eat like I do. You know, you're free, and we should be free to use a beneficial substance for our health or pleasure without fear of having our lives ruined. And for some reason, these sad, sad cases, these authoritarians, really want to continue using the law to bully us into behaving the way they think we ought to behave, and that's not what this country's about. I believe in liberty and freedom, and I believe most adults can make a pretty good decision about how to live their lives, and we don't need David Brooks or Rush Limbaugh or Nancy Grace or any of these other people, you know, using the law to make us live the way they think we ought to. So those are really the two main people, and then the main people who are opposing legalization, and then the third are the ignorant and the fearful. There are people who are decent people, good-hearted people, but they don't know the truth about marijuana. They're still wallowing in the residue of the reefer madness era, and they think this is going to hurt people, it's going to cause misery, it's going to really wreak havoc in our society, and they believe that it causes cancer, that it causes psychosis and misery, and will increase car accidents, and they're just not aware of what the science is saying, and that's where those of us who support the use of marijuana come in, because we have to be the educators, and we have to reach them and tell them what's really going on. It amazes me, all these benefits and all of these real protective properties, and the media hasn't seized upon this yet. They're still, you know, they're lightening up, it's true, but they still, you know, give acknowledgement to the myths and the hysteria, and they haven't really started to promote the benefits, which are far more valid and documented. So that's what I want to talk about now. And I thought I'd start out with cancer, talking about how marijuana really can help us avoid and maybe even treat cancer. This is so fascinating because we were told that this is such a dangerous substance, and research into marijuana's medical properties was suppressed from the 30s up through the 60s, and really the research was looking for harm, and there was one that was trying to find that marijuana increased the rate of cancer growth back in the early 70s, and the study was published in 75, and it showed that rats who were implanted with lung cancer cells and dosed with THC and CBD had a longer life expectancy than the controls, the ones who were implanted with lung cancer cells but didn't get cannabinoids. So the cannabinoids from marijuana slowed down the growth of the lung cancer cells in these rats and gave them a longer life expectancy. Great study, lots of promise. Nothing happened. It was Nixon's war on drugs. Nixon's war on marijuana was, you know, amped up by that point, and Ford was carrying the torch. And that study was ignored. It wasn't, you know, it seems like it should have been a Manhattan Project trigger to start some really dedicated line of research into using cannabinoids to treat cancer. Nothing happened in that realm. No one knew there was an endocannabinoid system until about the early 1990s. The first receptor was found in '98, and this means that we produce cannabinoids in our bodies, and we have receptors through our brain and in peripheral tissue, nerve tissue, and certain organ tissue. And the activity of these compounds we make, they activate these receptors and communicate. They send in communications that regulate different aspects of our physiology and our biology. And so these were all found in and mapped out in the early 90s, mapped out through the 90s, and then looked at up through the early 2000s as to what the activity of these receptors were. And one of the interesting stories is Manuel Guzman and his research team in Spain were looking at brain cell metabolism, and they knew that, you know, THC had been found to work with receptors in the brain, so they were curious how THC affected brain cell metabolism. The studies they were doing were done with brain cancer cells because they reproduce really quickly, and you can have a line of cells to study without having to keep buying normal cells. You have your own dedicated line reproducing really quickly, and it's much cheaper than buying them, and you can get basically the same data. So when they started trying to research THC with brain cancer cells, they couldn't do the research because all the brain cancer cells died off. And they, what's this about? They tried again. Brain cancer cells died off, complete death. So they said, wait. They went to the literature, they found the study from 75, so that gave them a clue that they're, what they were seeing was valid. And they redirected their study away from brain cell metabolism into cancer, brain cell cancer, and how cannabinoids affect it. And they found that THC and synthetic cannabinoids have the ability to change the signaling at a genetic level so that the cancer cells change their biochemistry. Instead of making pro-survival chemicals within the cancer cell, the genetics are flipped so that they start making chemicals that are hostile to their survival, and then they die off. Another thing that the cannabinoids do is to impede the ability of tumor cells to produce blood vessels. In order to eat, because they divide rapidly, they need a lot of nourishment, and that's why cancer patients waste. These tumors tap into the host and suck the blood. They're vampires. They drink, tap into the blood system and draw off nutrients. THC inhibits the ability of the cancer tumor cells to produce a compound necessary for producing these blood vessels. This inhibits their ability to thrive and to spread, and once they spread, to get a doc and to survive as a metastasis. So they were really amazed by this and continued their research, and once they published, other researchers started looking at it, and they found similar activity for breast cancer cells, for colon cancer cells, for head and neck cancer cells, bile duct cancer cells, pancreatic cancer cells. So many different lines of cancer cells all responded to THC or synthetic cannabinoids that activate these receptors. And so it really suppressed the activity and was very effective, for killing off these cancer cells. But this was all done in cell cultures and in animals. And so what you have to do to see if that's really translates into a human population is look at population studies, epidemiological studies. And what we see when we look at those studies is with bladder cancer, there was a study with, I think it was about 45,000 male subjects from Kaiser in Southern California. And this study found that marijuana smokers have a significant, about a 45% reduction in the risk of developing bladder cancer compared to people who don't smoke marijuana. They also found that the risk that is increased by using tobacco is lowered in marijuana smokers almost to baseline, almost to normal. In other words, marijuana protects tobacco smokers almost completely from developing bladder cancer. And then you look at the Tashkin study, where he was going to prove once and for all down in UCLA that smoking marijuana causes lung cancer, that heavy marijuana smoking has to cause lung cancer. How else could it, what else could it do? They did this study, this state-of-the-art population study. I believe it was about 1,000 subjects, and they found that marijuana smokers, regular chronic marijuana smokers, have up to a 37% reduction in the likelihood of developing lung cancer compared to non-smokers. Right. Yeah. So there was a study that found marijuana smokers have up to a 63% reduction in the likelihood of developing head and neck cancers. There was a study that found Kaiser here in San Francisco that marijuana smokers have significant protection from developing lymphomas. So we see that there is solid evidence in the human population to support the preclinical data that shows anti-cancer activity from cannabinoids. And we've also seen that the rise of CBD, which has become a popular cannabinoid for use and research. And what it does is, unlike THC, it does not bind to the cannabinoid receptors, but I liken it to an orchestra conductor because it's a really amazing compound. CBD is so amazing because it says THC, we're moving you a little bit away from the first receptor to the second receptor, and we want you to work over here. And it says to other receptors, we're going to tone down your activity level, or we're going to increase it. And so it's sort of like the conductor of an orchestra saying, okay, we need some woodwinds up here, bring the brass down, strings, we're going to need you right here. And it really has this overarching homeostatic regulation of so many systems in our bodies through all these different types of receptors that it's fairly mind-blowing. And THC and CBD together seem to work better than apart. So it's not a question anymore that cannabis has anti-tumor activities. And there's some evidence that certain types of chemotherapy that don't have a really effective response in patients work better when you include cannabinoids with them. That it's like the THC and the CBD go in and sort of soften up the cancer cells and get them ready for the attack. And then also protect the healthy cells, create something of a shield that shields them from damage from the chemotherapy. So this is a really amazing field that we're seeing. And I think it's really going to blow our minds, and the people who have been against cannabis are going to have a lot to answer for and a lot of shame and mea culpas. So another area I'd like to talk about is neuroprotection. That's really fascinating with cannabis, because for years we were told it kills your brain cells. Why do you think they call it dope? It makes you stupid. It ruins your ambition. It takes you down. It wrecks your cognition. You can't use marijuana. It's one of the worst things you can do for your brain. And this is the real irony of it, is the researchers who have been doing the studies on this have found just the opposite. Using cannabis regularly is one of the best things you can do for the health of your brain. And this data kind of came about because while Manuel Guzman was looking at what happens with brain cancer and how the cannabinoids THC and the synthetic cannabinoids go in there and kill off the brain tumors, the glioblastoma cells, they noticed, as I said a moment ago, that there was some protection for the healthy cells. They seemed to be in a better condition in the presence of these cannabinoids than they were before. So they initiated research into what happens in the brain and how cannabinoids affect brain cells and how they create these really positive responses within the brain. And basically, it comes down to the underlying causes of brain damage are inflammation, harmful inflammation, abnormal oxidation, and immune dysfunction. So what we have is a situation where with brain damage, you either have from a genetic component because you have a gene that has faulty transcription of certain proteins which aggravate the structure of the brain and interfere with certain neurotransmitters or receptors, or else you can have it from an insult to the brain, which can come from an injury, a head injury, or a toxic exposure, or certain types of infection. And these are the primary sources of brain injury. And what's fascinating is that cannabis really benefits all of these areas and protects the brain from all of these types of damage. So you have your brain. Your brain is really a dynamic and amazing amazingly organized unit of cells and electrical impulses and neurotransmitters and enzymes and all of these compounds that work together in a very delicate, specific balance. And when something gets out of kilter, it tends to throw other things in the brain out of kilter and start these chain reactions. So the underlying causes, inflammation, that can come because of toxicity from bad genetics producing bad proteins in the brain. As I said, it can come from insult from toxins, poisons, carbon monoxide. Other insecticides have certain toxic reactions in the brain. And the oxidation is it's abnormal oxidation. It's a sort of reactive oxygen that is harmful and throws everything out of whack, damages the brain, and then you have your immune dysfunction, in which you have immune cells in the brain and they become dysregulated and begin to attack other cells in the brain and harm certain areas of the brain. So these all play together and play off of one another, and it's hard to tease them apart, what causes what, because your inflammation will trigger you know, an immune response, and this immune response gets out of hand because of the inflammation, and then you get oxidation because of the toxicity. And so it's this whole mishmash of misery and suffering that comes from these stimuli, and cannabis has amazing effects against them. In Alzheimer's disease, what we tend to see is inflammation, and perhaps from genes there's a bad snipping of a protein, and the segment is toxic when it's not transcribed right, when the protein's not snipped right because of a genetic problem. It becomes very toxic. It's a bait called beta amyloid, and it gathers in plaques in the brain, and this plaque causes inflammation, and it's also toxic to the cells to the nerves within the brain cells, and it disrupts them and causes them to tangle and get confused. And so then you get the immune system in the brain, the immune cells, the glial response, and what happens with that, microglia, is they get overexcited and they start attacking the brain and damaging the brain, and then you have the oxidation. And as I've said, this all plays together, and it's hard to know what causes what. I spent like 3 days watching John Hopkins YouTubes and trying to figure out what causes what. Couldn't figure it out. Called a neurologist, and he says, well, you can't figure it out because we don't know. You know, it's not clear what the A, B, C of this, but it is a reaction that cannabis can attenuate. There was research from the Scripps Institute, and they found that THC is uniquely effective at disrupting the enzyme that causes the toxicity of this amyloid, this beta amyloid protein. So it inhibits the production of the toxic protein, and it also, like a scrubbing bubble, goes in and breaks up the plaque that interferes with nerve transmission because of these this toxic protein that gathers, and it tends to reduce the formation of the tangles of nerves within the brain cells. So it's working to prevent the damage, to stop the damage, and to even correct the damage, because cannabinoids have been shown to trigger adult hippocampal neurogenesis, which is the production of healthy, functional new brain cells. Yes, THC, CBD seem to produce new brain cells that can replace the damaged ones. This is pretty big news after we've been told that THC is, you know, a brain cell killer and all of this nonsense we've been brainwashed with, to find out that the opposite is in fact true, that THC shields brain cells and triggers the production of healthy, functional new ones. Yay. And so this has been shown to, you know, this has been shown, as I said, in cell cultures and rat and animal models. And they've also shown that the use of cannabinoids in rats and mice, they either can breed them so that they have these cognitive deficits, or else they use certain chemicals that they inject that cause the same type of damage that you see in Alzheimer's disease, and then they test them with mazes and cognitive tests, and they find that after administering cannabinoids to them, they have a significant improvement in their cognitive ability. And that's great, because we have this wave of dementia that's facing us, this tsunami of dementia, and it's going to be hugely expensive for the healthcare structure of the United States. It's going to cause so much misery and heartache. Alzheimer's is possibly one of the worst diseases there is. the loss of self and consciousness while the body remains essentially viable is just a disaster and miserable and horrible. And anything we can do to stop that it's really our duty to do it. If you know someone with a family history of Alzheimer's, they need to be using cannabis. They don't have to get stoned, they don't have to get high, but they need to be introducing these compounds in their body on a regular basis. They can use a tincture or low-dose edibles or capsules, but Gary Wink, who did a lot of this research at the University of Ohio with his companion, his collaborator, Yannick Marchalant, who's in France. They collaborate between Marseille, France, and Ohio. And actually, Wink says that, you know, it's really remarkable that people, what cannabinoids do for the aging brain, it stops this. It's the only thing they found that works in the aging brain to reduce neuroinflammation. Other things work in youthful brains, but to really attenuate inflammation in the aging brain is the key. And cannabinoids do it, and they do it very effectively. So his colleague, Marchalant, coined the motto, "A puff is enough," because one puff of marijuana a day is enough to offer significant protection for the aging brain from age-related dementia diseases. And I think we really need to get that out there. There's no reason people can't use cannabis to protect themselves from Alzheimer's, no reason whatsoever. So the interesting thing about neurological diseases is that they seem to have these common components of oxidation, inflammation, and immune dysfunction, but they take place in either different parts of the brain or at different rates. And so you have different syndromes that manifest themselves from all of these degenerating effects. And another one that's really becoming a problem is Parkinson's disease. It's got a large number of people who are suffering from it in our country. And, you know, Michael J. Fox, Janet Reno. Sad irony for Janet Reno, who refused to call a moratorium to the arrest of AIDS patients who use medical marijuana. But maybe she's wised up and is helping herself now. So Parkinson's disease is an impairment of specific brain cells, dopaminergic neurons. It impairs the ability of neurotransmitters to relay signals. It affects coordination and stability and causes tremors. And there have been positive effects from a drug called Sativex that's being produced from whole cannabis plants that they have found that it really does help to stop some of this inflammation, excitotoxicity, and what's called mitochondrial dysfunction, where the mitochondria, energy producers of the cells, are not able to produce energy. And so what we have to look at is with some of these ailments is, so you have your CB1 and your CB2 receptor, and some ailments respond better to CB1 stimulation, some respond better to CB2 stimulation with minimal CB1 stimulation. And researching Parkinson's disease, I found it works both ways. You know, CB1 stimulation with THC has benefit, but then CB2 stimulation without so much CB1 stimulation with a cannabinoid called THCV also has benefit. So if you have Parkinson's, and this is the terrible thing about the repression of research in human subjects with cannabis, we don't know. We can't sit here and tell you what to do, what to use, how much, when. You're going to have to wing it. And the same thing with many of these other ailments is you're going to have to try different strains and find out which one works in which delivery method for you. And you can talk, you know, network with other Parkinson's disease patients and see what they found. And this is the great benefit of dispensaries, because the dispensaries allow for consistent, constant access to medicine that works for patients. Once they find out what works, they can continue to receive it. And you don't get that from a dealer. A dealer, you know, you get what they got. And so we really need to encourage support for dispensaries. And up in Washington State, that's one of the problems with legalization, is they're trying to get rid of the dispensaries to funnel people into making money for the commercial tax, cannabis distribution system. And I think that's terrible. Patients need to have dispensaries that are dedicated to medical use, because the staff knows how to counsel the patients and steer them to what might help. They're really good resources for this. So it's hard to say, what to use for Parkinson's disease, but there is effects, there are effects, excuse me, and there is a reason to rely on it. And you want to turn to it and see what works if you think you could benefit from it. I can't recommend, but I can say that if it were me, I would start trying some forms of cannabis and seeing what really helps. There's no need to wait for the FDA to approve, Sativex. I think there'll be benefit for having pharmaceutical cannabinoid products, because doctors are going to want to give people exact doses that work for them in exact patterns of cannabinoids, but that doesn't say that it can't be done for less serious ailments on a community level. We don't have to pay the inflated rate that Big Pharma is going to charge when we can do it ourselves in our backyard or our friends' and families' yards. So the other ailment I really wanted to talk about that cannabis is amazing for, and this has come out since I published my book. I have a little mention of it in there, but the data is really quite stunning that's pouring in, and that is diabetes. Diabetes is one of the most pressing health concerns we have in our country. The obesity rate is through the roof. It's going to cost us so much money in terms of health care, because diabetes and obesity, they set up problems with your heart, your kidneys, your liver, your brain. You're more likely to manifest Alzheimer's early with obesity because of the increased inflammation, with cancer. So this is really amazing, fascinating data to me, that THC, CBD, and this really amazing cannabinoid called THCV have powerful anti-diabetes activity. And there was a study done, it was the Haynes study, and it is a huge study, tens of thousands of subjects over many years, and they published, I believe it was 2 years ago, the data that found that regular marijuana smokers have a profound decrease in the likelihood of developing diabetes, a really significant level of protection from developing diabetes. And research has also found that marijuana smokers are much less likely to be obese. And so what you see is this interplay in the metabolism, and also the whole ability of the body to process sugar. So what we see is in type 1 diabetes, which is a more genetic autoimmune disease, it looks like cannabinoids can delay the onset of type 1 diabetes and decrease the severity of the onset of type 1 diabetes. They're preserving, what happens is you have your insulin-producing cells in the pancreas, and the body turns on them and starts to kill them off. And cannabinoids slow or stop that activity and can preserve some of the function of the insulin cells in the pancreas. And then with type 2 diabetes, you see if someone's in has metabolic syndrome and starts using cannabis, it really looks like this can delay the progression to full diabetes. And if you're using cannabis and you have a family history of diabetes, there's a pretty good chance you can avoid or delay diabetes. it really is quite amazing because, once again, you see this influence of inflammation, oxidation, and immune dysfunction that cannabinoids address and attenuate. They adjust, they calm it all down, they bring it to where it should be, they bring it back to a homeostatic balance, they make everything harmonious. And so with diabetes, you get less. What happens is with diabetes, you can't process your blood sugar. You don't have the insulin, you're not taking up the energy from the sugar into the cells and using it, so the glucose circulates. Glucose is very, very toxic. It causes damage to cells. That's why your body wants to use it, get it out of the blood, use it, and balance things out. So you start to see terrible, terrible damage to nerve cells, organ cells from this inflammation that comes from glucose toxicity and then oxidation. And cannabis shields us from that. It really can protect us. And so what's really promising and wonderful is not only do you have with diabetes protection from developing diabetes, a delay in the development of diabetes, but for people who are already diabetic, cannabinoids like THC can work to prevent diabetic retinopathy. What you get is, a toxification, a damage to the optic nerve from the glucose, inflammation. And so you see that cannabis stops that. It, attenuates it, and it significantly reduces the threat of going blind from diabetes. It also preserves nerve function and circulation. And so you're going to have less risk of losing a limb, having amputation. And diabetics are increased risk for cancer. It's going to dial that down and help protect diabetics from developing various cancers. So it's just, with this disease, this terrible, terrible disease, and all the misery it causes, and the expense, and the, the harm that it does one's daily life, having to monitor your sugar and inject yourself and worry if you're going to go into a coma and have a candy bar and juice or whatever handy. And, to really prevent this or delay it and to alleviate this kind of misery from our society, I think is imperative upon us. And we really need to be proactive in promoting cannabis use and encouraging people to use it for their health. I've said before, and I'll say it again, and I'm going to keep saying it, adult marijuana use equals health-positive behavior. You're not going to get away from that. The data's not going to turn around. It's not going to change. We're just going to see more and more of this health-preserving, health-improving behavior, because this is what is at the root, the foundation of so many illnesses: inflammation, oxidation, immune dysfunction. It's like the trunk of a tree. You've got your bark, your cambria, your heartwood. Well, you got inflammation, oxidation, and immune dysfunction. That's the trunk of your tree. And then what you have are your branches. Your branches are cancer, dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, arthritis, all of these type of illnesses, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, even glaucoma. They all are branches that really extend off the tree of inflammation, oxidation, and immune dysfunction. And cannabis really works to encourage a proper balance in the body to attenuate these and bring them back to the level, because we need these, we need the process of inflammation. It's part of healing, but when it goes out of whack, it causes a lot of damage. Oxidation, it's a valuable process. We need that too, but out of whack, it's a problem. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that's how it works. For years we were told that we're crazy, we just get high and don't think about that we're suffering. Medical marijuana couldn't possibly work for such a broad range of ailments. It's a delusion, but now we know. It's the endocannabinoid system, our own cannabinoid system, our internal cannabinoids that we generate, and then the plant cannabinoids from marijuana that we can ingest, take into our bodies, that amplify the health-preserving, health-reclaiming effects of our own natural cannabinoids. It's a supplement, it's a tonic, and that's what it's doing. I just think that we need some last thoughts before I wrap this up. We need to think about legalization as a moral justice, a human justice project, and not for tax, to increase tax revenue. This is a moral cause. It is to free people. There is no reason on earth why people who enjoy using marijuana or benefit from using marijuana, who enjoy growing marijuana, or who distribute marijuana, there's no reason these people should be arrested and taken into custody and have their lives ruined for dealing with this incredibly beneficial plant that is not only, as I've said, far less harmful than alcohol, but far more beneficial. It's a sin. It's just terrible to wreck someone's life. And they say, oh, well, very few people go to jail for marijuana. Well, that's because they're forced into treatment. But even getting arrested for it increases your level of stress. It takes away from your physical reserves, your monetary savings, because you have to hire a lawyer. You might lose your job. It stresses your relationship. Every aspect of your life it puts in stress. Stress produces inflammation, and it produces excitotoxicity in the brain. And so keeping someone from using cannabis, and then by imprisoning them or arresting them, it's carcinogenic. It's a neurodegenerative act. It causes neurodegenerative actions, and it's harmful. It hurts people. It damages their health. And the irony is you cause all this stress in people who are maybe using cannabis to treat themselves, to lower their chances for developing diseases by attenuating stress. You take the cannabis away, you put more stress in their lives, and then you make them go to these programs where they're in conflict because they have to parrot these lies the treatment center demands to get out of the center with a clean bill of so-called health. That's just wrong. It's wrong in every level. The other thing I want to talk about is driving laws. Driving laws, per se driving laws, have no foundation with cannabis. That means that if you have a certain level of THC in your blood, you're guilty of driving while impaired. That's not going to hold up. The only way to work with cannabis and problems in driving is to test people for impairment and use that as a way to prevent harm on the roads. When you have, when you're using cannabis for pleasure or for medicine, you're going to have residual cannabinoids in your blood that may go over the level that some states have said at 1 microgram, whatever it is, nanogram, that's it, sorry. 1 nanogram, which is, you can get that, I think, by getting secondhand smoke. And they're going to charge you and throw you in jail for impaired driving while under the influence. And there's no basis for that. We have to fight this push to use per se marijuana driving laws to stop people from using marijuana. That's the goal of this. It's not to make the roads safer. It's another way that the authoritarians can stop marijuana use. There was a study that was published in the Journal of Law and Economics that found in medical marijuana states there was a significant decrease in traffic accident deaths following implementation of medical marijuana laws. 9%, about an average of 9% drop in traffic accident fatalities, and it was primarily due to a displacement of alcohol use. But there was even a little bit of evidence that showed it was independent of that, and that is because people who use cannabis either refuse to drive when they're very high, or they drive far more carefully than someone who's on alcohol. They're aware of their impairment. Actually, a study found that people who are high on cannabis and asked to drive overestimate their level of impairment and are very cautious, slow down, and don't pass and do not have the same type of risks that alcohol consumption causes. And so we can't, there's no reason to punish people who enjoy cannabis by using traffic laws that don't make the roads any safer. Anyone who's driving impaired and causes trouble, you know, harms someone, kills someone, lock them up, punish them. But you know, there's no reason to punish the innocent because of misguided values in a lab test. The other aspect is youthful use. I personally don't think young people, teens, should be using cannabis. I had a couple of people come up to me once who are really accomplished professionals and said, you know, I disagree. I used it when I was 14, 15, and it opened up curiosity about the world and my intellectual, my desire for intellectual exploration, and I really think it helped who I am. But I just really think that it can be a distraction for teens. They can get too involved in it when they really need to be learning. It's the time where they need to be finding out who they are, where their skills lie, where their proclivities for, you know, having job skills are, and developing those. And if you get, you know, they have less ability to modulate their behavior in terms of marijuana use than adults do. They're more likely to get kind of obsessed with it. And I think it can be a real distraction from maturation. So that's the reason. I don't think that there's a lot of proof of the IQ drop, that the study, there was a study that showed IQ drop among teens who are very heavy users of cannabis. That was refuted. The refutation was refuted, and then the refutation has been refuted. So, you know, I don't think there's a lot of evidence, but I don't think it's really necessarily great for teen brains. It could be that there's evidence that in adults who use cannabis have increased functional connectivity in the brain. And in teens, there's a point at which all these connections branch out and then they have to be brought back. Maybe the increase in functional connectivity inhibits the ability of the teen brain to sort of dial it back and tighten it up. I don't know, but I just think that it'd be better for teens to delay it till they're 18 or 20. There's also evidence that the head and neck cancer protection really kicks in at age 20 for marijuana smokers. But I don't think that teens need to be lied to and abused and locked up necessarily for using cannabis. If they're getting good grades and they have a good social life and you find out they're using some, talk about it, be a parent. And that's what it comes down to. Keeping kids off marijuana is the parent's responsibility. I shouldn't have to go to jail because you aren't doing effective parenting. It's the parents who are going to make the difference. And my parents were networked, and they knew who I was and what I was doing when I was a kid, and kept constant, you know, contact with that. And I wasn't able to use marijuana until I was 17. So the last thing I'd like to say is that marijuana reduces our chances for developing cancer, reduces our chances for developing dementia, reduces our chances for developing diabetes. It reduces our chances for developing a number of other inflammation-based illnesses. It makes eating pleasurable, sleeping wonderful, sex transcendent. It makes going to a museum a revelation. And I think we should promote responsible marijuana use in order to improve the health of our society, and that promoting marijuana use is an act of love. Tell your loved ones and your friends that they can use cannabis. They don't have to smoke, they don't have to get high, but they can really acquire some significant health protection by using cannabis. Thank you very much.
That we're going to have questions in a minute. If you have questions, and if you could write them down and then pass them over. And in between this, we want somebody, an aide from Senator Leno's office is here, and she'd like to say a few words to Clint.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name's Anna. I'm here from Senator Leno, as Ruth said. And I just wanted to say thank you to Clint And I do have a little certificate of recognition for him because it's very important to acknowledge the work of people that help all of us. And his work obviously will go a long way to continue a very important conversation in the medical field and in humanity. And it's the beginning, I think, of ways of how we can change the world for everyone and make it a better place for everyone to live. And so with that, I have a certificate of recognition for you, acknowledging you on the publication of your book and thanking you for all your work and helping to make a better life for so many people.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
For once in my life, I am speechless. That's an anomaly.
And
Wow.
I have an envelope for you for
thank
traveling.
you. You know, I just want to say thank you so much for this honor. This is really a complete surprise, and I just want to acknowledge Senator Mark Leno's work in this. He's been with us from the beginning. He never shied away from working for medical marijuana because he saw what the AIDS crisis did to people, how it affected the gay community and the broader community, the whole city of San Francisco and the world. And he saw what marijuana did for AIDS patients and learned what it did for other patients. And he didn't neglect to act like so many other representatives have, who are very disappointing. He took it up and he fought for it, and he's worked to implement Prop 215 and to defend it and to expand it. And I think that we should all give a salute to Mark Leno. Wow.
And Tom Amiano.
Yes, Tom's also been there too.
Okay, I'd like to do questions if you
Okay,
want to go
yeah.
through them. And we'll do as many as we can. We do have a time factor, so we'll see how many we can do at once.
Okay, what is your opinion of low THC, high CBD strains of cannabis? Great question. So CBD is the cannabinoid that doesn't have psychoactive effects as such. Might give a sense of well-being, you know, just a little sense of well-being, but not the psychoactive effects of THC. And it's being used in seizure disorders. I think you've seen with Dr. Gupta, with children. And so I think it's great to have high CBD, low THC strains because there's going to be ailments for which this is uniquely suited. But the problem I have is that there are some people who want to do this sort of Manichaean approach to THC and CBD. THC bad, CBD good. And that's invalid. You know, that's this reefer madness attitude circulating through again because THC is not bad. THC has profound anti-tumor effects, profound neuroprotective effects, profound immune modulatory effects. CBD can amplify that. And CBD has its own properties where it might just need a little THC for certain ailments. But that's what we have to research and learn. And, but yeah, I think it's great that we have CBD. I think it's wonderful. It's changing the whole conversation about cannabis, completely changing the nature of the discussion. How do I see the industry going forward? Will the current dispensary model prevail? Will the feds step in and allow only big pharma to dominate the space? I think that's what the feds want to do. I think that we're going to have to make sure that doesn't happen. It's up to us. And, you know, the more people who don't know this information that you convey it to and bring into the, you know, circle of cannabis healing, the better off we're going to be in terms of building a bulwark against federal intervention. I love the dispensary model. I hope it stays. If it transforms into a you know, a more social use, recreational use, hybrid with it, where they still keep the medical emphasis, I don't have a problem with that, you know, if they're also selling marijuana for social reasons. But I really think that the dispensaries are so valuable for educating people and for making a broad range of products available. This was Vivian McPeak, who established Seattle Hemp Fest, asked me to write an opinion piece about the attempt by the Alcohol Control Board in Washington to squash medical marijuana and move everybody to commercial taxable marijuana. And, you know, it's misguided. That idea is wrong. We really need to preserve the medical use for its own good. There's so many products that don't get you high. Topical, we have, look into these topical for pain, topical sprays, topical balms, tinctures that you can take. THCA tincture, it's not psychoactive, it's a raw form of THC that's not been heated. You smoke it, you bake it, it gets you high. If you take it without heating it to a certain level, it doesn't get you high, but it has its own type of anti-disease properties. And I just don't think that the recreational social dispensaries, stores, are going to want to dedicate shelf space to cannabis products that don't get you high. That's why we need to keep dispensaries. What is the correlation between cannabis use and heart disease? Interestingly, there's studies that showed very, very, very ultra low doses of THC offer significant protection for the health of the heart, the brain, and the liver. Those are the ones they've looked at, and you're going to see it also for the colon, the pancreas, because it's the same process, this reduction of inflammation, oxidation. And the problem with marijuana smoking is you do get carbon monoxide. If you're using cannabis and you have heart disease, already have heart disease, you're going to want to vaporize or do tinctures. You're not going to want to smoke because there are harmful gases in marijuana smoke. They're carcinogenic and they're hard on the heart muscle. But the great thing is that the cannabinoids, THC, and probably some of the other components, the terpenes in marijuana, block the harmful effects of the smoke so that you still get some benefit. But if you take the smoke out of the equation and vaporize, you're just getting the good. How far have we come with regards to nursing home? Oh, God. Patients being routinely medicated. I don't, you know, it's sad. I know that there's a really big figure in the cannabis movement who's written books on cultivation, who has a brother who has Alzheimer's, and he's in assisted nursing home living, and they will not let them give him cannabis. They will not allow it. And it's insane. And I have parents who are in nursing home in North Carolina, and my mother has Alzheimer's. I know it could help her. How am I going to do it? You know, what, am I going to go to prison in North Carolina? No. You know, so it's very hard to try, and they're not going to allow it to be distributed. So more work to be done, more education and outreach. We have to convince people of the truth and bury reefer madness. Yeah, well, you know, and you might have seen on Gupta, they had the people in Israel who were in the nursing home and were using it, and it's beneficial. It helps. It helps with the suffering. It helps with mood. You know, it provides levity.
It is becoming more accepted in hospice care, though.
Oh, yeah, it's been for serious hospice care, especially in places like the Bay Area. It's pretty well been tolerated for a while. Are there adverse consequences that marijuana can have on memory? Any other long-term There's, you know, heavy-duty cannabis use has been shown to impair short-term memory, but it recovers once one stops. Also, the people who are regular, constant, chronic cannabis users adapt to it and do not seem to have the effects. I think a lot of that is distraction. You know, especially when you're first getting high, it's sort of that, oh, wow. You know, the colors, everything, the insight, you know, everything's inspiring and amazing, and your senses are just opened up. And, you know, it's distracting. Where did I put my keys? Oh, God, I'm so high. Where did I leave my keys, you know? So, but you don't, you know, if you're a regular cannabis user, medical or for social reasons, you develop coping behaviors and you don't have those spacey moments. I'll put my memory recall up against pretty much anyone. I do think that, you know, it's a little distraction. And the interesting thing is that your long-term memory is preserved by using cannabis and enhanced. So, you know, if you're dialing back this neuroinflammation, you're doing good. Let's see. Yeah, well, I mentioned this about the development of the brain. You know, Gary Wink, who's pro-marijuana for Alzheimer's, says that before 15, there are problems. The developing brain is much different than the adult brain, and cannabis has an impact on it. How severe is not clear, but I know that arresting some kid for cannabis and taking him to youth detention is not really going to be good for their psyche or their development. The other thing is that legal marijuana that's tested and you know, certified free of toxins is healthier if it's diverted to teenagers than black market marijuana, because pesticides that are used on marijuana are far more harmful for neurocognition than is the marijuana itself. So black market marijuana that's been sprayed with these pesticides that really actually interrupt cannabinoid receptor activity and damage the brain are far more dangerous. So if marijuana is being diverted from a dispensary or a store to teenagers, it is some level of harm reduction. But, you know, put in laws that if you get an adult who's providing cannabis to 14, 15-year-olds, hammer them. I mean, I'm sorry, maybe that's the only law. You know, maybe not the first time, but if you have someone who's doing that, maybe that's the only law to retain with regard to cannabis, you know, use, is to discourage people from providing it to very young kids. For, you know, it might be for nefarious reasons. I remember the song, "Have Some Madeira, My Dear." You know, I wanted her to have Madeira. What is your opinion of wait, recycle, okay, new ones? I hear that cannabis is good for, great, sickle cell anemia, thank you. How does it work for this condition? Well, my spouse, Donald Abrams, who is one of the only people researching whole cannabis use in human beings on Earth, is looking to do a study with sickle cell patients with Dr. Oh, look who's here, Paul. Yeah. So we have Dr. Gupta. So he's collaborating with a doctor who has done research in an animal model of sickle cell. And what I learned that I didn't know is sickle cell is where your blood cells are misshapen. Instead of being round and disc-like, they're warped. And they gather up in the joints and in the narrow part of the circulatory system and cause pain. But what I didn't know is that another problem with it is as they move through the body, because they're not this nice, smooth, spherical shape, they rub against the vessels in the body. And rubbing against the vessels creates irritation, which creates these inflammatory compounds that are so harmful to the body, cytokines and such. And so then you get this circulation of these inflammatory compounds, which causes neurological problems, more nerve problems, makes you more susceptible to diabetes and cancer. So it's not just the physical activity of the clumping of the blood cells, it's actually this irritation, this inflammation it creates. And of course, marijuana reduces inflammation really effectively. So thank you very much for that question, for bringing that up. And hopefully Donald will be able to do the study and get some good results. And there's been some resistance to legalizing marijuana in the African American community because some people within the community see it as a way of keeping black folks down. Sort of the idea that, you know, with crack cocaine being introduced into minority communities. And I don't think that, you know, that's necessarily valid. I think we need to open discussions about that and let people know that it can be of benefit, you know, that people with sickle cell could really benefit from this. So that might turn some of the hostility to legalization around. Dispensaries don't allow anyone without a physician's prescription to purchase there. Anyone, should that change? Is that the question? I'm not sure what the... Oh, well, let me tell you, yeah, it's true. You need not a prescription, but a letter of recommendation from a physician, practicing physician. So what I encourage people to do, you know, these idiot doctors who are so hostile and fearful of recommending marijuana when it's one of the best things they can suggest for their patients. You know, it's bad medicine. They're practicing bad medicine. Kaiser, I think, is really hostile to writing any letter. But there are doctors who you can go to, who you take your paperwork for your ailment, and you present it to them, and they will write you a letter that you can use. You don't have to get the card. Just use your letter. You don't need to get into the state system, pay more money. But Dr. Stephen Ellis has an office down at Union Square. He's a wonderful physician. He's a wonderful guy. I recommend him. I think there's a Dr. Barth in the East Bay that people talk about. But, you know, I think you can go to the back of one of the San Francisco Weekly, and these are the people that our opponents decry. They call them script doctors because they'll write out a prescription for you for, you know, you tell them your complaint, maybe you show them your paperwork, and they'll give you not a prescription but a recommendation. I think they're great. I think they're wonderful because they're making marijuana available to people who need it. They're going around these cowardly doctors who are practicing bad medicine. And people criticize, well, what about the young men who use marijuana? They get their letter and they just use it to protect them so that they, you know, can go and buy marijuana. I'm like, you know what a kind of a health risk and threat being arrested for marijuana is? Using a letter to keep from getting arrested for marijuana is health positive behavior. You know, it's reducing your likelihood for developing disease, and it's certainly preventing you from sinking into a terribly miserable state. So I say that the dispensaries are great. The doctors who write easy recommendations are great, and let's use them. So yeah, if you know, someone here can help you. Now I'm not taking questions from the audience, but Ellis, E-L-L-I-S. And he's been a really big promoter of reform in medical marijuana for years and years, since, you know, the real beginning of it. Antibodies produced in myasthenia gravis. You know, I couldn't find anything about that. That was the one neurological disease that I couldn't find any information on cannabis for, but I suspect it would help because, you know, there are similar degenerative processes going on. I'm not a doctor. I can't recommend anyone with it use it, but there should be some research done. And I'm going to go back to PubMed and double check that because it was a few months ago when I did check that. We have the PubMed. If you really want to see what's happening, you can keep up with me on Facebook or whatever. I have a website that's kind of tenuous now. It got hacked and attacked by Viagra Cialis promotions. So it's kind of being rebuilt now. But my website, marijuanagatewaytohealth.com, I put a lot of things up there, recent studies on Facebook, Marijuana Gateway to Health page, Clint Werner page. But PubMed, if you go to PubMed and you can type in cannabis, comma, whatever disease, and a lot of studies are going to come up, and they're pretty scholarly, but you might be able to get an idea, and, you know, don't overwhelm me, but if you don't get it, send it to me, and maybe I can help interpret it. So, yeah, there's not really much about that yet that I've seen, myasthenia gravis. But like I said, these syndromes all have similar, you know, degenerative origins. Please elaborate on the refutation of the New Zealand studies. Okay, the New Zealand study, was done. There's a whole group of people in Australia and New Zealand who are sort of authoritarian paranoids about marijuana, and they throw a lot of money into trying to produce results that show it's harmful, and sometimes they're really dishonest. I mean, it's sad to say, but they're very dishonest at times about this. And so this study came out, and it said that teens who smoke marijuana heavily have a significant drop in their IQ. And my thought is, well, they shouldn't be smoking it heavily. Where are the parents? How can you smoke it heavily if you have good parenting? And then there was a researcher, Rothsberger or someone, from, I believe, Sweden or Scandinavian countries, and he refuted it. He said that they hadn't accounted for, variables in economic background and social standing and education, and that they had really not accounted for these variables, and that there was no validity to the results on IQ drop. Then the people who did the study responded to him and said, oh, but we did this and that, and that's why it's valid. And then he responded and said, yeah, well, you may have accounted for that, but you didn't account for this, and you're still wrong. So it's just a back and forth. And I think it comes down to kids shouldn't smoke marijuana, young kids, and they should be prevented from it by their parents primarily, and the culture at large. Their parents' friends, have a network of parents who are keeping an eye on the kids. Get off your devices and parent.
What age do you think is a cutoff?
Yeah, I think 18 is generally. I don't think people should be, like I said, don't panic if they're younger and they're getting high occasionally and they've still got good grades and they're, social interactions, and. Let me see real quick.
Stop right here.
Okay.
And Clint is going to be signing books. If you want to buy a book or go back and talk to him or answer some of the questions, have your questions answered, Clint will be in the back signing books, and we'll be able to talk to different people. So I want to thank Clint. This was incredible.
Oh, yeah.
Outstanding. And thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care.
Thank you all. I really appreciate you coming. That made it wonderful to have so many people turn out.